Definitely, definitely. The best determinant of how a student is going to do in school is the education of their parents and their involvement in their education. It is very difficult, however, for parents who have low levels of education. In the Latino community, we have language issues. That parents do not know the language, are intimidated by schools. Latinos who are here legally are afraid to go to the schools. Schools are not welcoming environments, except for those charter schools that are community charter schools that are welcoming of parents. So in the research that we've done, more than a third of the students that come to our schools, in their homes, they don't have a single book. They don't have computers either. Only 49% of all Latino families have access to broadband. So it's very difficult to reach them through the internet. So parental engagement is one of the most critical issues, and it has to start very, very early. Our programs show that when parents are involved, when parents understand the system, when parents are not afraid to talk to teachers and principals, when they know their rights and their responsibilities, that is a major plus in the education of their children.
Because, and that point about schools not feeling open. It's interesting to watch what's happened to schools over the last generation because of security considerations, because of policing and perimeter considerations, who's in the school building, signing in, signing out. Schools have become a little impenetrable. You can't just walk up and see what your kid's class is up to, or drop in and see an assembly, or you have to jump through some hoops. How do you make schools a little bit more community property? And is that really part of the answer here?
Well, it's certainly part of the answer. Schools have to be more invitational. I think there's a big role for community-based organizations to sort of fill a niche in bridging between communities and schools, and making sure parents, especially in the Latino community, are aware of the importance of a language-rich environment, aware of the importance of reading to children, whether it's in English or Spanish, just preparing them for the school environment.
And we do know that parental involvement is really key. Education begins and ends at home with the parents, and it's not the federal government's responsibility. But unfortunately, what we're seeing now, and I think we're seeing it through national standards, we're seeing it through increases in federal funding, is really just a greater federal role for education, which will unfortunately further remove parents from that responsibility. Today, we can expect a child entering kindergarten to have more than $120,000 spent on his or her education by the time they graduate high school. That's an incredible amount of money, yet the results are just not commensurate with what we're spending. We know that a third of kids are not proficient in reading, or really
well, a lot of
functionally
that money,
illiterate.
that sounds like a lot of money, $120,000, but when you take a closer look at it, that's not making it down to the classroom level of their individual classroom, 25 kids with a teacher in a room. That's being spent in all kinds of other places.
It's tied up in the bureaucracy, which is another problem when we see the increasing federal role in education. So how do we increase parental involvement? And ultimately, it's through school choice. It's giving parents options. And we know here from the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program, the voucher program here, that parents who before had no option, had no choice of where to send their child to school, became the most involved parents imaginable when they knew they could choose a school that best met the needs of their child.
But school choice is an answer that's presupposed by there being a problem with the local neighborhood school. The people wouldn't be clamoring for school choice if they had some secure feeling that the school that's 2 blocks away was okay.
But until that is okay, I mean, they should have school choice regardless. There's no reason we should lock them in based on their zip code. But here in DC, we see 4 applicants for every available scholarship. They are clamoring to escape these failing public schools. But regardless, even if our public school system was immaculate and producing fantastic results, parents should still have options.
Ron, you wanted to say?
Well, when you talk about the role of the federal government, the role of the federal government was initially in education, and still is today, is to promote equity. And it's only 7% of the investment that we have in education. The rest is state money, state and local money. And when you talk about resources, until we have some sort of equity in resources in schools and in states, we're going to have a persistent problem. There are schools in affluent public schools in affluent areas that spend $16,000, $17,000 per student, whereas down the road, probably an hour away, you have a school district that can only afford to spend 7 or 8. And that disparity, resources are important in schools. It's not a matter of throwing money at schools, but resources do matter. If you have computer labs, if you have science labs, if you have well-trained, well-paid teachers, if you have a facility that is inviting, and if you have sufficient staff to be able to deal with parents, with students with disabilities, with students who have special needs, that makes a huge difference. So it is, to a large extent, it is resources, and it's not federal. It's not federal. It's not going to be federal. The federal government doesn't have the money to be able to solve this problem. But I guess you're right. You know, when you talk about charter schools are an alternative for parents, but I don't see charter schools as a substitute for public education. We have to create models through charter schools that the public school system can use, address the needs of some students that they're not doing well in public schools, but we certainly cannot substitute public education for charter schools or any other choice program.
So what can we do short term? Because if you're in 3rd grade now, you haven't got 10 years for the educational establishment of the United States to figure it out. You'll head back into the front door of some building in September or August. Raegen, what's something we can do starting with the next school year to make life better for our school kids? 45 million of them between 4 and 18 years old.
Well, what gets me up in the morning is what Secretary Duncan says, which is we have to stop lying to kids. One of the ways we lie to kids is about the way we distribute resources in schools. Inequity is a complicated subject, but there's a lot of inequity within school districts, not to mention between districts or between states or in how federal money is spent. But within school districts, often one school serving a high proportion of low-income children will have a dramatically lower level of investment if you really look at the money that's getting to that site than another school serving a much lower, much higher income group of students.